All righty. Hopefully everyone can see that. So today's topic is electronic closings and RON in Pennsylvania. I'm proud to present with the illustrious Rob Musser and myself as CTO of Security Title. Again, a few housekeeping slides. You're in listen-only mode, but you can ask questions in the question section of the control panel. We will carve out time to address any questions and comments. In the past, we haven't had a number of questions that do flow through. So if in the interest of time, if we do have to cut it off to keep on schedule, know that if you do submit a question in the questions box, we will get back to you afterwards with a response as well. So don't worry if your question is not answered on air, we will get back to you. And again, just to reiterate, in order to obtain the continuing education credits, you must be present, watching, and answer the poll questions throughout this presentation. Just a little bit about ourselves. Rob is the VP of Underwriting and Regional Claims Counsel here for Security Title. I'm the Chief Technology Officer. We've got extensive experience within the real estate industry, specifically underwriting, but also transactionally. I personally have assisted in my previous vocation, implemented a RON during the pandemic. This is almost since a year ago. It's crazy to think. Last March in Wisconsin, I helped the title company get implemented with RON about 2 weeks after their state started to do shutdowns and people were concerned about in-person closings, and we had to give them an option there. So we both have our respective experiences with remote online notary. Rob more so with the legislative and I'll call it more legal side, and me with more of the technical and implementation side. So our goals today, we're going to learn about eClosings generally, and I say eClosings specifically because there is a difference between eClosings and RON. We're also going to learn about RON, remote online notarization, and you'll probably hear me refer to as RON just because I'm trying to save my voice throughout the day. We'll learn a little bit about the history of how we got to where we are today generally, and also Pennsylvania specific. And then lastly, we'll hopefully leave you with some initial considerations for your path in ultimately conducting RON closings, what to think about, what to prepare for. So let's start it off with the first poll. I'm going to go ahead and launch it here, and it'll be, how much experience do you have with eClosings? And no right or wrong answer, just wanted to get a nice gauge of how folks are looking at it. So the poll is open right now. Feel free to put in a response. We'll give another 45 to 60 seconds. And of the choices, we try to vary it enough, so hopefully you'll fall into one of these categories. But there's no shame or in any of these. We understand that everyone's at their own stage of it, and this legislation is still relatively new. Alrighty, we'll give another 10 more seconds. Looks like we have 88% voted already or responding to the polls. All right, I'm going to close this out in 3, 2, 1, closing the poll here. And let me go ahead and share the results real quick with you. It looks like we have a nice even distribution almost. 31% says we've begun researching eClosings but haven't performed any yet. 34% said we haven't performed any eClosings but do plan on it, which is a healthy majority right there, so that's great. 14% say we have performed a few RON or RIN closings, so that hats off to you guys. You guys have figured out a piece of the puzzle there. And then 20% saying we do not plan on performing eClosings, but I'm glad they're joining us today to learn more about it. Alrighty, back to the presentation here. Thank you very much for your input. Oh, let me see, I think it changed the sharing screen. Let me see this here. There we go. That's better. I think you guys would be able to see that a lot better now. All right, so we're going to get into a brief history of Ron. Rob, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, I had to do a little work myself to prepare for this, mainly to see where all this developed and when. And actually, the whole idea of a notary public, why do we use them or need them in the title business? And it comes from the unique requirements of the real estate title industry that documents must be not only recorded in the land records, but before they're recorded, they have to be acknowledged before a notary public. And notaries actually date back to Roman times, and back then they were a government official who related to the people, helped with language problems because of the empire being so widely dispersed, and basically interface between the people and the government for ministerial purposes. Basically now a notary, at least in Pennsylvania, is somebody who basically administers oaths and authenticates documents. And the idea is to provide a reliable government recognized witness to important transactions and documents. In a lot of Latin countries, the idea of a notario publico exists, but it's a much more comprehensive role. They actually hear some small claims cases, and it's a more expansive position for people with that designation in other countries. So much so that in Pennsylvania, the use of the name notario publico is actually prohibited by a Pennsylvania licensed notary public. And just going back to how this all developed in Pennsylvania, the whole concept of a deed, as we know, is that it's more than just a document. It's an actual historical event. It started in the Middle Ages with the idea of livery of season, where you went through a ceremony, public ceremony. People couldn't read and write, so they had a sort of witness ceremony there, where the owner of a property would take a clod of dirt and a branch from a tree and a cup of water from the river and pass it over to the grantee, and it would have to be witnessed by people because there was no recording place and they couldn't read it even if they had one. So, for instance, when William Penn came to Pennsylvania first time in 1682, he did this ceremony in Newcastle, Delaware, got off the ship, and there's a plaque down there in Newcastle that memorializes what he did, the same livery of season ceremony. And so it was that sort of a thing that people used to document land transfers until the recording system got in place. In 1683, Philadelphia established a land records office, although even then there was not necessarily the idea of a notary public, but just they would acknowledge a deed in an open court and it'd be recorded in the court records, and that would be the establishment of ownership. And basically because the deed was this historical event, there developed then a way to record these events. In 1715, Pennsylvania passed its first recording act and established a recorder of deeds offices for the various counties at that time. It required each office to be provided with paper and supplies to record in a fair and legible hand all deeds and conveyances. And part of it, I think, the part of it I reproduced here on the screen for two reasons. One is that this is the only part of that original 1715 statute that still is in effect today. And this archaic language is still what requires us not only, or enables us to record, but it also requires the acknowledgement of any document, any deed that is presented for recording. The end of the statute says that it authorizes them to come before one of the justices of the peace of the proper county or city where the lands lie, who is hereby empowered to take such acknowledgement of the grantor if one, or of one of the grantors if more. But the second reason that I put it here is because at the end of that whole sentence, it is clear that if you have more than one grantor in a deed, only one of them has to be acknowledged. And this has saved transactions, and a number of times over the years I've done this. Last year at this time, we were in at our mountain place, sheltering in place up there, and the internet was not great, and I didn't have a scanner, and I was taking documents outside in the grass and taking pictures of them and sending them with my phone and all that. And somebody called with a problem in which there were two brothers that owned a property together, and one was here and could acknowledge his signature. The other one was in Italy, and at that point Italy was a mess and couldn't get to an embassy or a consulate to find a U.S. notary. So I sort of felt helpless up there. I sort of hung up with the agent and felt bad that I couldn't help him. And then I remembered this 1715 statute, and sure enough, I reported it back to them, and the recorder accepted the document with only one grantor signature acknowledged. And it's never, I've never had it refused. So it's something to keep in mind, some free legal advice there if you get into that situation. In 1791, Pennsylvania passed the first notary public law. It provided for the governor to appoint 6 notaries for Philadelphia and 3 for the rest of the counties. And this law was in place for over 150 years. Then in 1953, there were several changes that transferred the responsibility for the appointment of notaries from the governor to the Secretary of the Commonwealth. And that's who administers notaries matters now. The law was amended in 2002 and was in effect until October 25th of 2017. The 2002 amendments made some changes to the 1953 law. It introduced legal or education requirements for notaries, and it also had some rudimentary provision for electronic notarization. Then, and Anshi, you can, I think, go to the next slide. In 2017, Rulona went into effect. This was a uniform law throughout the United States. Members of the bar get together from time to time and produce by committee a uniform, sort of a sample template law that can be used in each state. And they do it on all kinds of issues, contracts and torts, and there's a uniform law committee that came up with this uniform law that was developed in Pennsylvania. It actually was signed into effect by Governor Corbett in 2013, but it never really got fully implemented until 2017 because of all the adjustments that had to be made by the Secretary of the Commonwealth. So this act allowed for electronic notarization and eliminated the need for paper in notary transaction. And it provided for the notary to use an electronic signature or electronic notary certificate on any electronic document. But it still required the notary and the signer to personally appear before each other. As an example, a year ago, I bought my first brand new vehicle, a truck at New Holland Toyota, and I went to the office there to fill out the loan application and the title papers and the registration papers. And there was a plate glass surface desk kind of thing, and the notary stood across from me or sat across from me, and I was given a stylus, and I signed my name with the stylus on the glass everywhere he told me to sign. We were both there in the same space. COVID hadn't started yet, and but I was doing everything electronically. There was no paper involved and or available unless I specifically asked for it. That was all done under the Rulona law that was again, signed by the governor in 2013 and went into effect 2017. Then we have COVID coming in early 2020, and the things were sort of a mess at the beginning. I remember last year at this time, the governor, well, a lot of people were doing parking lot closings and drive-up closings outside because of the distancing requirements and the health issues. And we prevailed upon the governor to temporarily lift the requirement that notaries be in person with the signer because of the difficulties of doing that with the COVID pandemic. So on April 20th, the governor signed a 60-day temporary waiver of the requirement that the notary do his notarial acts in person. At that point, I don't know how widely used the remote procedure was done, but later in October 29th, the legislature passed the Remote Online Notary Act and permanently exempted or got rid of the requirement that a personal appearance happen in connection with notarial acts. So that's how we got to where we are today with Ron. And just if the Rulona Act is any precedent and perspective, it will take some time to fully implement all of the regulations in connection with Ron as well. Okay, let's move to the next slide.
Rob, if I can interject with just a little anecdotal experience. So last March, I had been working for a regional title agency based out of the Midwest, and it was March, I believe, 3rd or 4th when Wisconsin passed their RON legislation. So I have a picture of me with the governor, pen at the signing, all the ceremonial things, and I'd been working on that with our counsel there to get that signed, along with a lot of other lobbyists and organizations too. So it was a nice pivotal moment on that March 3rd or 4th. I can't exactly remember. And then I distinctly remember about when it was signed, there's provisions saying that we would have about 5 months, I think 5 to 6 months to get all the rules and regs in place, all the little ancillary things for implementation of RON in Wisconsin. And I remember thinking, great, we have got a five-month timeline to get it up and running and everything there. And then the pandemic hits. So literally 2 weeks later, I think on about the 16th, that's when the governor of Wisconsin also implemented an emergency order. And that was how the world got, at least my world then got upended, and the task was truncated from 5 months ramp up time to implement all the way down to about a few months just to get everything squared away. And I believe the title agency I was with was able to conduct their first true RON session under the emergency order in Wisconsin there, probably within the first month. And then afterwards, about a month and a half, we had about 50 of their staff, closers and their staff, registered and able to perform electronic RON closings. And that was a huge help in terms of limiting in-person contact and hopefully mitigating the spread of the pandemic there. But yes, where are we now? Thanks for going into a little bit of the details of the laws and everything, but where are we now? You know, the industry still is coordinating towards eClosings. So there's definitely a trend towards it. But it really does require everybody's effort, and it's almost a web of interconnectedness that we're all in. State and local government, as Rob was explaining, the laws that have to be in place that allow it, the legislation that has to be in place. So that takes time. Our title underwriters, you know, we have our considerations in terms of what we will allow and what we will provide coverage for and things like that. Lenders too, they have their whole ecosystem of the mortgage market originating, and then also secondary market in terms of selling and moving e-notes around, let alone just be ready to carry e-notes. So they have their considerations there. Title attorneys and title agents, the boots on the ground, the folks that are actually meeting electronically with the consumer to sign and electronically notarize documents. That all needs to be figured out as well. And ultimately, the RON vendors. The RON vendors, they need to be vetted. They need to be held accountable. They need to also be able to provide competitive services, because there's a bunch of them now. RON vendors also have to stay competitive and also adhere to all the changing legislations or all the changing aspects of the industry. So we're all interconnected. It's going to take a little bit of time and for us to really have it become ubiquitous or commonplace, but the trend is that this is going to be something that we do more commonly in the future as we progress. Some of the things that have helped that speed along is the lending industry has accepted RON signed loan documents, so their adoption of e-notes and the e-MERS registry system. The GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, both accept e-notes now. That was a huge step in progress there. Secondary markets and investors also have started to say, yes, we'll accept e-notes, and just structurally there, we're starting to take those steps. Here's a adoption map of RON, states with enacted RON laws, states with active RON bills, and states that currently have no current activity. There's also that, and this is taken from the Mortgage Bankers Association website. And I've been tracking this map for a couple of years now, about 3 years now. And in the beginning, it was all sorts of different colors. Now I'm surprised to see there's only 3 different colors for different states and territories here. If you looked at this a year ago, even 6 months ago, there would be a lot different landscape here. So Pennsylvania is in that, I'll call it gray or dark blue, with states with enacted RON laws, so that's wonderful. But as you can see, there are still a number of states that haven't passed their own bills just yet, but are active with it. I know also there is a push, I believe Alta is also pushing or has released some information about a nationwide level of unity in terms of legislation too. I'm not sure exactly where that is at, but I know that exists too. So that could be something in the future. So what is RON? Rob, would you like to take that that broad question?
Sure. Just before I do, though, the importance of this understanding what RON is significant. Like, I am not at all a tech person, and this is a steep learning curve for me, but notaries are put in a very responsible position. Several years ago, I had a title claim in Delaware, in which a son had who had the same name as his father. He was a junior and father was a senior. Applied for a mortgage in his father's name, went to a UPS store, got the mortgage, signed the mortgage in front of the UPS employee who was a notary, took the signed mortgage and acknowledged mortgage back to the closing, and settled for the refi, took the money and spent it at the casino. So when this is discovered, I forget if the mortgage went into a default or how the thing was discovered. It was a title claim, obviously for us. It was a $102,000 mortgage, and we hired counsel in Delaware. And the UPS employee, of course, was in the crosshairs, the notary there, and the insurance policy for that UPS store business stepped up to the plate and they had a liability policy for $100,000. They paid the policy limits, which pretty much took care of the title claim. But I've often wondered about that employee, what the ramifications were for that notary. It's just the world we live in is so fraught with this risk of fraud and forgery that this is a very important thing to keep up with for the notaries. And the risk assessment, the liability ramifications between a notary and the employer, and the insurance that's available for covering this kind of thing is important for you to establish and find out about and update in this whole area. So what is RON? There is a lot of confusion about what remote online notary is and how it needs to work. It's not simply a Skype session, FaceTime, Google Hangouts, and all that sort of thing. It's a more complicated thing requiring software to nail down virtually the requirements that have traditionally been met personally in an encounter between people, the customer, and the official, who is the notary public. It allows a remotely located individual to appear virtually before a qualified e-notary. And again, the requirements are that even if you are a notary now, you have to specially apply to the Department of State for permission to do e-notaries. And you have to have the software and the technology to conduct it remotely. And there's also special software to enable the notary to positively identify not just the people, but the documents, and establish that the documents in the possession of the notary are the same identical documents that is being signed by the person in question. It's supposed to be just like a live encounter between the two parties, but it's done virtually. And I like I say, I'm not very technology oriented, but if you all are old enough to remember the Star Trek TV series, I look at this RON statute as a stopgap step before we get to the actual Star Trek transporter room stage, where the people involved walk into the transporter room, step on one of these lights on the floor, and they get beamed to some interplanetary agreed upon location and conduct an in-person encounter there with the Klingons or whoever, and then get beamed back. I mean, that's, Anshi can comment on this, but I see that as the next step beyond the RON encounter. The idea is that the people are really meeting, it's just not in physical proximity.
You're absolutely right, Rob. I'm just looking at Ron here, Rob. Yeah, you're right. I think even before the pandemic, so if you remove the pandemic out of it, let's say 2020 never happened in that respective, there's still a lot of demand for Ron. They're commonplace. They're just logistics of having to take off time from work, pick up the kids early from daycare, anything like that, just to logistically have 3 sellers or 3 purchasers all logistically in one location to conduct a closing. That can be cumbersome sometimes. So there is a demand for this remote access individual, and the truth is technology now has caught up to the point where the powers that be have decided that there is enough security, there is enough regulation there to allow for this to occur. I totally understand that there's different levels of comfort with everybody around there, but the technology has caught up to this concept. So like you're saying about science fiction and Star Trek, the hope is that eventually, yes, we'll have some of those conveniences too. Now, it'd be interesting to see if people will want to beam to it and actually beam to a location and sign the document, as opposed to just having their hologram there and vetted and properly. But that's an interesting concept. I like that.
Okay, so the the precise requirements in Pennsylvania, let's see, I don't know if I'm on the same slide that, yeah, if you want to advance, I think you can advance to the next
Sure.
slide.
So yes, this is, there's, and I wanted to reiterate one more thing. This is using special and unique technology. This is very specific. They're robust platforms. They're not just a FaceTime that I can get on my phone. Now, some of these RON providers are now taking the leap into mobile support in terms of being able to conduct the sessions, but they still have to meet these conditions. And we've listed them down here as well, just in terms of just having a little bit more specificity there. There are signer requirements. There's a special process for identity proofing. One of them is dynamic KBAs. Another special process for ID verification. There's real-time video and audio, which is important. That's also recorded. So there's a log. There's a record of it. The e-notary must have a digital notarial seal, as opposed to just a crimper stamp in the old school days or just an ink stamp. And then also the e-notary, we always recommend that e-notary have a script to qualify voluntary and signer capacity. That, that is our recognition of you guys as closers and e-notaries out there. If someone walks into the room, sits across from you at a table, there's a few senses. You can sense, different things. It's a different feeling as if you were conducting a digital closing where you're just looking at somebody on the screen. You get a better sense of somebody. Are their eyes kind of wandering? Are they sweating? Are they nervous? Things like that. And that goes to more so the voluntary and also signer capacity considerations too. But Rob, I'll switch over to this side for Pennsylvania considerations specifically.
Yeah, obviously, as he says, it requires more advanced technology than we're used to having in these situations. Pennsylvania, the statute requires either personal knowledge of the signer on the part of the notary or a credible witness in the notary's presence. In other words, if the remotely signing person is signing and somebody in the notary's presence knows that guy, oh yeah, that's Rob Musser, yeah, I recognize the guy, then he can swear to the notary in the notary's presence, and that's a legitimate way of identifying the person. Then you can also do it by two identity proofing processes or services, and again, the regulations for what these actually mean are being developed by the department. And it also allows for third-party services, vendors, to provide the notary with a means to verify the identification of the person, written scans and facial recognition, that sort of thing. The notary also, and this is a tricky part, must identify the documents that are being signed by the identified remote signer. Right now, the lawyers in the audience know that at least in a lot of the Register of Wills offices in Pennsylvania, there is this problem that had to be addressed immediately with COVID because of the in-person encounters with the registrar's office being impossible because of COVID. So they developed different, they didn't develop, they actually just used existing applications, Life-Size and Zoom and whatever, to connect with a video conference between the person who wanted to be appointed as an executor or administrator of an estate and the registrar who was authorized to issue the oath and swear the person in. So even now, I have a terrible time when an estate comes into my law practice and I've got to do this. My camera has to work on the phone, and I have to be able to point it to the document that the person is signing in my presence, and then it has to be verified that that document is the same document I in advance sent to the Register of Wills office. And it's a very cumbersome process. But the technology for that and for the all other notary acts is developing, and hopefully will smooth out that process. And the other requirement that Ron put into effect was that there must be a recording of the audiovisual elements of the Ron's closing, and that has to be kept for 10 years. And they still also have to keep the notary journal. So the notary journal requirement hasn't been affected, but the additional requirement is you keep a copy of the video recording, audio-video recording for 10 years.
Rob, if I can interject just about the number one here, the ID requirement. So if I'm a closer and I'm also the notary in a real estate transaction, and let's say the buyers are from out of state, they're relocating to a different state. I have lived in a number of states throughout my adult life, but I don't purport to know the font size, font type, where the position of the hologram is for a driver's license in Utah. I just have no experience with it. I wouldn't know. So for me, the interaction would be, I'd pick up a license. Okay, feels nice, feels legitimate. Maybe it's got some of the I'll call it the little bumpiness in terms of, some sections are there. I know some different states have used other, anti-fraud technology there in their actual documents, but I'll look at it, look at the person. Yeah, it looks about right. Well, maybe they lost a little bit of weight, maybe they changed their hair color, maybe the hairstyle is a little bit different, or things like that. But looks about right. That's the extent of my capabilities as a notary. With technology now, a lot of it's done digitally. So what will be required is in a true RON session, that the signer would present his or her government issue ID, which is a typically driver's license or a U.S. passport, and they would hold it up to the camera. And of course, the camera has to be sensitive enough to capture this detail, or they would have to take a picture of it with their smartphone that gives a better resolution. And that would be sent to a third-party database that has a store of information to vet if that image is correct. And it goes down to font size, font type, where the position is, and also verifying that the license number is correct and all the information is correct as well. So there's a bit more of a robustness in the ID requirement there. But in addition with that, there's other identity proofing, like you were mentioning. Those are mostly in the form of dynamic KBAs. Those are dynamic knowledge-based authentication questions. So as opposed to static KBAs, which are typically what you would see in the bank, where it was if you lost your password or needed to reset your PIN at the bank, they would ask you, well, what's your mother's maiden name? That's a static answer. That answer never changes, whether it's today, whether it's 10 years from now, it'll always be the same. And that has its limitations too. Anybody that knows your mother's maiden name will have that information in perpetuity and should technically not change. The dynamic part of the dynamic KBAs are questions that are worded, and this is through the use of artificial intelligence, questions that are worded and cultivated from different governmental databases or just third-party databases that have information, such as a DMV records. LexisNexis also has information on you. But those kind of questions would be something of the tune of, what was the color of the car you purchased in 1984? And it will give you a whole bunch of multiple choice questions, and that would be, say, different colors, and you have to pick that. Now, from that, I believe that the standard now is 5 multiple choice questions. You must get 80% correct, so 4 out of 5. And if you fail the first time, you have 1 try to do it again. If you fail the second time, you cannot continue on with the RON transaction for another 24 hours. I think that's usually the standard that's given now too. So you can imagine that, if some bad actor was trying to fraudulently purport themselves to be somebody else, those dynamic KBAs are a little bit tougher than just a simple "what's your mother's maiden name," which they can find somewhere in records and possibly just reiterate that there. So that's another type of identity proofing. Plus the fact that there's the recording, they have to be on the recording at the same time, and also the interaction with the notary. There's a robustness to RON transactions.
Okay. Couple of legal questions that in my mind are not totally settled yet in connection with the Pennsylvania RON law. The law actually purports to permit Pennsylvania notaries to acknowledge notarial acts done elsewhere, in another state or even outside the United States under certain conditions. I have my doubts about the constitutionality of that. The notary laws are a state by state. They're administered and developed state by state. And for a Pennsylvania notary to notarize something that is physically done in some other state or overseas, I think could be subject to attack for constitutional reasons. So if you have that kind of a situation, let me know. I mean, if there is a notary in the out of state situation in that state that takes the notary electronically, that's not a problem. But if you're a Pennsylvania notary and you're asked to acknowledge the execution of a document elsewhere, talk to me before you go ahead and do that. The statute says, item 3 there, that the notary must live in Pennsylvania. Actually, the notary must live or have a place of employment in Pennsylvania, and has to be approved by the department, not just as a notary, but as a RON notary. And in my view, the notary and the signer both have to be physically present in Pennsylvania for it to be valid under the law. That's, again, my opinion, but I do take a conservative position on that just because of the constitutionality question. I think that's it for that slide.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, and like you said, the law was passed, last, not even about 6 months ago, right? I think October-ish, a little bit more. So, and there's the rules and regulations have to be fleshed out, and just with anything new, there's always going to be a little bit of twists and turns, things like that too. So I'm really glad that you're bringing this up too, just to say, hey, just because it's passed doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels and say this is how it is. We still have to figure a few things out, which is a great. It's okay to be a little skeptical. It's okay to take our time and get into it. It's not something we want to just rush right into. However, our goal is to make sure that you're educated so you can make that informed decision for you and your company. All right. Well, let's go ahead and I'm going to launch poll number 2 here. And the question is a simple one. Can you use GoToMeeting to perform a remote online notarization in Pennsylvania? And only two different responses. And we'll give the audience a few moments to answer. All right, we got about 85% of you voting already. So we'll give it another 15 seconds for the rest to cast their responses. All righty, well, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll here, and I'll share with you the results. We had an overwhelming majority at 84% say no, and that is the correct answer. And there are a few of you in the audience, 16%, that did say yes. Now, this was worded a bit specifically, and it might be harken back to my standardized testing days, but this is a question specifically for remote online notarization, not remote ink notarization, the RIN that was allowed per the emergency order. The RIN there, you were able to use FaceTime or things like that for it. This question specifically is for remote online notarizations. The answer is no. You must use a more robust platform that has more features than is currently offered by GoToMeeting or Zoom sessions there. All righty. Well, let's move on to from RON platform. So this is where I have done a lot of research. I've been researching RON in general across different states for about three years now, it seems. And there's some considerations I wanted to share with you. Now, title underwriters may have specific approved vendors. And Rob, I'll let you make any comments there, but I don't believe we at Security Title have a list of approved vendors. Is that correct?
That's right. We do not.
Now, I'm sure we do ask you to obviously follow the laws and the rules and regulations and things like that, but we don't have any have any specific approved vendors that we think are better than others. We want to empower you and educate you so you can make your own decisions. And the truth is, everyone's company, everyone's outfits operates differently. There might be different nuances that you like, and just like all these other vendors, there are nuanced as well. But we encourage you to talk to your lenders as well, about lender partners, about which platforms they're researching and partnering with. They do have a lot of sway in terms of they need to have the e-note set up. They need to be with the MERS e-registry set up as well. So you might find that your lender partners have already started doing research and have become affiliated or like or prefer specific platforms over the others. Now, I've listed a few of these: Notarize, Notary Cam, Nexus, and Pavaso. Notary Cam was one of the first ones. I believe they started in Virginia. And I think that stemmed from the fact that Virginia residents that worked in DC area that had these hefty DC government IDs would say, hey, why can't I, with my super vetted, super robust ID here, why do I have to go back to DC to sign or consummate my transaction there, or sign documents there? Why can't I just do it with this ID remotely? And I think that was the starting point of this concept there of RON. So that was where it started. Now, all four of these softwares I've had the privilege to be able to actually conduct remote online notary transactions with. And I can tell you that all of them now, for the past 3 years, they've all looked completely different than they did before. They have upgraded their abilities. They've made their webcam interfaces a lot sharper, a lot faster, and they've also added a lot of new features too. So I'm excited to know what the future brings with these vendors. But in general, they all do the same thing in the sense that they must abide by the dynamic KBAs, the ID verification, the proofing, identity proofing as well. And they also provide the robust platform where it's a live session that's being recorded and the documents are being shown in real time, so that everyone's looking at the same document too. There's a lot of other considerations as well. For example, Pavaso, they'll help you set up your folks as e-notaries. They'll also, for a fee, they do help your staff become e-notaries and provide a digital e-notary stamp. Some of the other platforms, such as Nexus, you would have to go through the National Association of Notaries, I believe, to obtain a digital stamp. So there's some little nuances there from the implementation and operational side that are different. And again, just a reminder, Skype and Zoom sessions are insufficient for the full remote online notary RON sessions. I wanted to also share with you, we had mentioned earlier that the GSEs have started also allowing e-notes, and that has been pivotal in progressing RON and the spread of this technology there. Here's a list that Fannie Mae has published for e-closing technology service providers, vendors that they will. So you'll see that not all vendors here are made the same. There's different vendors here that can handle e-notes, that do handle e-closings, and then also from a mortgage or a lender perspective that also can provide an e-vault. That is what, I know everything has an E in front of it, but that is what houses the electronic note for the lender before it's put into the e-registry and then and moved on accordingly. So I would suggest you also do some research as well and take a look at what they are recommending as well, Fannie and Freddie too. Then another set of standards or things to help you vet RON vendors and to consider also are the MISMO standards. I think these are relatively new within the past year or so. They've come out. The Mortgage Industry Standards Maintenance Organization, or MISMO, has created standards to promote consistency within the mortgage industry. But that's also a good way for us as title folks to also vet our vendors as well. And I've given a list of the current MISMO RON certified providers that they're listed on the website as of, I believe, yesterday. And you'll see a lot of these names come up repeatedly because they are the industry leaders currently. I've had the privilege of working with a few lenders on their platforms as well, and I can tell you the lenders mostly are looking for platforms that can essentially also tie into their e-note and e-registry and e-vault, but also provide the best user experience for their consumers, for the average maybe not so techie folks as well. So I think they're prioritizing user experience and user interface with their ease of documents and moving it around. And Rob, would you like to talk about e-notaries as well?
Well, just that the process that we're talking about can't happen until somebody who is a notary or becomes a notary gets the special dispensation from the Department of State to do these e-notary processes. And they obviously, if you're going to do this regularly, you have to be familiar with the technology and the platforms that Anshia is talking about. information, all this is on the Department of State's website, and we have the link to that there on the slide, and there is a lot of information there. I will say that it can be confusing if you're looking at the information they have. Some of it is still up from the strictly the Relona point of view, and as we said, the final implementation of the RON regulations may be some time off. That link just sort of gets you started on the process of finding out how to do it, how to become an e-notary, and whatever the department can tell you about the different platforms.
Thanks for that, Rob. And I get that question a lot when talking about RON with closers or title agents. They ask, well, do I need to be an e-notary? The answer is no. There are plenty of RON providers, RON platform vendors that supply their own e-notaries. Now, depending on the different state that you're in or different laws, the regulations, those e-notaries might be sitting in Virginia. Those e-notaries might be in Florida. So you want to make sure that you're asking those questions when you're vetting these companies. Where are your e-notaries residing? So that may not fly, like we were discussing earlier with Pennsylvania, things like that too. So if that's the case, you want to make sure that you understand that. Now, in the title agency that I worked for previous to Security Title, we valued the flexibility, and in Wisconsin, the law allowed our e-notaries to be able to notarize, a little more flexibility there. We essentially said, well, we want our staff during normal business hours to be e-notaries so we can provide exceptional service to our consumers and our customers. But if there's someone that wants to handle their transaction after hours, well, we want to partner with a vendor that also can provide e-notaries, so that at someone who works, third shift or something like that, or just an awkward hour, can still at 11 o'clock at night can still also have their transaction taken care of too. So that was a flexibility and a being able to provide a service to our customers at that time. That was a consideration there. All right, and then we'll move on to our last poll of the day. Poll number 3 here. Do you or your staff plan on becoming e-notaries? I'll go ahead and launch that. Hopefully you fall into one of these categories. Although I'm interested in seeing what the distribution is and what the general demographic thinks. All right, we've got about 80% of you voting in, so feel free to cast your ballot now. I'll close this out in about 10-15 seconds. All righty, we'll give it a few more moments here for the last bit of you to answer. All righty, I'm going to close out the poll now, and I'll share with you the results. It looks like it's a pretty even distribution here. Looks like 9% of you said yes right away, so that's great. I love your enthusiasm there. 31% said yes once we've selected a RON vendor, so great. You're doing the research and you're trying to figure out how that works for you and your outfit and your company there. 34%, just about even, says no, we're still researching and vetting vendors, which is great. And then 25% of you say no, we're not planning on having our own staff become e-notaries, which is wonderful too. And again, a lot of those vendors, they're all different and provide different services. I can say that I believe notarize.com or Notarize, their platform started off as saying, hey, you need a quick one-off notary? We have our notaries. That was their whole shtick. Now they moved into more robust, okay, let's partner with title agents to perform on the regular real estate transactions too. So even if you're not planning on have your own staff become e-notaries, there's still opportunities out there to perform RON transactions. All righty. So at this point, we've got about a few moments here. I'm going to turn it over to the question and answer section here. I'm going to take a look. So we've got a bunch of questions coming in, and I know we want to stay on schedule too. So Let's see what we have here. Rob, we've got a bunch of questions here just going through because there's a lot of them that repeat, but there's a question here about the document, the electronic document in a RON transaction. Who holds it? Who owns it? Things like that. And I'm assuming the question is going to be, well, maybe what we can answer in terms of two different ways. But let's talk about the note, because I think that's a very important document in a traditional real estate transaction. So we can parse it out note, and maybe let's just say a closing statement or affidavits. I'll call it of a lesser document, but it's not really lesser. Who owns or who holds that in an electronic transaction?
Well, the ones that I've seen, not the one that comes to mind is one that was a Vermont transaction, and it was done without the purchaser of the property ever connecting personally with the law office that was doing the e-closing. And I don't understand all about the law of negotiable instruments, but if it's a note, the possession of the note is obviously very important, or has been historically. But if the document is signed remotely, I think the law, at least in Vermont, provided that document, once signed remotely and accessed by the closing officer in, his law office or whatever, was valid and effective for all purposes, if to the lender, and that was accepted by the lender. And so the physical possession is a very nebulous thing now with virtual closings. But the one, like I said, that was done remotely, and the signing was done remotely. But there was other documentations that I remember as part of it, which the signer, agreed that this was their knowing intentional intent to do this electronically, and possession of the physical document really was of marginal importance.
Mm-hmm. And I can tell you from a technological standpoint, so I'll just use Pavaso as just a very specific. We use Pavaso for a majority of our transactions in the past, and I know I've worked with a bunch of real estate agents. Oh, I'm sorry, title agents here in Maryland that also use Pavaso. Pavaso system what you do is the closer would upload the specific documents necessary for the closing the transaction, and Pavaso houses that digital document, allows them to put down their electronic signature and the notary and any other tags or any other information that you would have to apply. And then after that session is complete, the e-notary or the closer that's handling the transaction locks down that document. So if you imagine a PDF, you can lock a PDF almost, and you can password protect a PDF. What happens when that locking is that the different layers of signature, notary, text on the PDF are all smushed down or flattened into one specific one layer. And under all of that, there's metadata. So that actually tracks exactly what time things are being signed, what time an action occurs, what the IP address of the computer used during the session is. So it tracks a lot of this metadata that's all underneath the face of the document there. So with that being said, that's how technologically they can track, okay, this is the original, this is the document there. And then also Pavaso has integrations with different companies that allow you to e-record. So if it's a document that needed to be e-recorded, it's not only saved and locked down, but also can be sent right away after closing to e-record with a finger click, as opposed, there too. Now, that was only applicable for jurisdictions that had e-recording capabilities. I'm not sure in the state of Pennsylvania if all the counties have e-recording capabilities, or if they're working to get that there. But those are some of the efficiencies that technology does bring. So we have one more question here. Rob, Rulona requires one tamper-proof notary log. Can you discuss how to maintain a paper and digital log where an e-notary may use multiple vendors? And that's a great question. I'll answer the digital side of things, the technological side, and I'll throw it over to you, Rob, afterwards. the digital side is, I'll use Pavaso again as a vendor. They have their own log that's in there that's tied to a notary. So the way their administration is set up is that each e-notary has their own e-notary log that is recorded for each and every one of them, one transaction that they've done, and they must fill that out immediately after each notary session. So that's there. Now, if that same e-notary person was using a different vendor, that would be tough. I would assume the vendor might also have their own electronic notary log. But the question I know was more so for paper. So Rob, I'll switch that over to you. Are there anything that you can add with someone maintaining a paper log?
Not really. I mean, electronic logs are as valid now as paper ones, but how you actually do that is beyond my realm of knowledge.
And I'm sure there's going to be more additional rules and regulations that come out, that's a great question there. So we might follow up with you in a couple months once that is kind of a bit more fleshed out and let you know as well. So.